Morning. As typical, we like to start our meetings with a prayer, reading, or thought, along with a Pledge of Allegiance, and we typically look to members or individuals who have joined us to participate in that. So I would ask for any volunteers who would be willing to offer a prayer, reading, or thought, or lead us in the pledge if there are any. And in that, Bruce, which one? You mind doing the prayer? Perfect. So you can come forward, and then maybe Commissioner.
Glad to lead us in the pledge.
Thank you. Just state your name at the podium, and then.
Father in heaven, we are grateful for all of thy many blessings. We're also grateful for this beautiful country we live in and the blessings that provides us. And we're gathered here to organize as citizens and elected officials to further the work of our communities. We pray thy blessings upon these proceedings, that we might be guided in wisdom and understanding and in civility and making the best decisions for our community. We're thankful for those who have volunteered to serve and those who participate. And we're grateful for all these things that give us peace and safety where we live. And these things we pray humbly now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
For one nation under God, if you would, if you can, stand and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, a few housekeeping items to get us started with this morning. Commissioner Graves has asked to be excused from today's meeting, so we would grant that. Given the two-member body, I will, at this point in time, dismiss a portion of Robert's Rules of Order, which will allow me to second any motions that come from the body. And as a point of clarification for those who are joining with us, we will go through and build our agenda at this point in time. We have a consent agenda currently with 14 items and a regular agenda that has 12 items. Our typical process is if there are no questions on a particular agenda item, those items are moved to consent, following which any agenda items that have questions or discussion items we will hold and discuss at that point. And so we'll build through that. During the process, if you have a comment or wish to speak to a particular item, when that item comes up, we will give an opportunity at that point in time for public comment. So starting off with, we'll work through our consent agenda. Commissioner Lee, did you have any items on consent you wanted pulled? I had none as well, so all items will remain on consent that were currently there. Looking at our regular agenda, I would like to have discussions on item number 2, item number 3, item number 4, and item number 8.
Also, if we could do item number 5.
Okay.
Oh, let's see, hang on, one more. Also, item number number 7. A couple questions on item number 7.
For a week?
Number 7?
Yes.
Okay, because I didn't see some language that I was looking for that was in there. Anyway, continue that for a week.
And we move that to consent for continue? Okay. Okay, Renee, to make sure you followed with us, we have moved regular agenda items number 1 and 6 to consent, along with regular agenda item number 7 to consent to continue, which means we will be discussing items 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8. Good. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. The first item up for discussion today on our regular agenda will be regular agenda item number 2, to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the Utah County General Plan 2014 and adopt Section 5-18 of the Utah County Land Use Ordinance to adopt a grazing zone. This time, I would actually like to invite staff to come forward, if they would, and present their findings and the results of the Planning Commission on this particular item.
Bryce Armstrong, Community Development. As you may recall, earlier in 2017, you heard a rezone request for all the public lands, majority of all the public lands on West Mountain that are presently zoned mining and grazing. That application was brought to you by a citizens group. And kind of as working through that process, the County Commission, well, I guess to back up, that request was to rezone the property from mining and grazing to our current CE2, Critical Environment 2 zoning. I think with the primary purpose of eliminating any potential new gravel or mining operations. The CE2 zone did not allow those. There were some challenges with the CE2 zone. County Commission, along with the Planning Commission, Planning Commission recommended disapproval of that, and the County Commission also voted to disapprove that. As part of that process, the County Commission asked that the Planning Commission review and recommend a potential new zone for the county, a grazing zone, G1 zone, and also along with that, contemplate the potential rezoning of West Mountain, both private and public properties that currently zone mining and grazing. So that's a little background. Most people are probably familiar with that. So as part of that process, staff has worked on developing a new G1 zone. It's based on the existing format of the mining and grazing zone as it relates to residential densities and uses. It was specifically eliminated gravel operations, mining operations, batch plants, crushers, all the associated uses, and then also took a look at some other uses that kind of be deemed maybe not necessary in a grazing specific zone. And so that was taken to the Planning Commission in November. The Planning Commission reviewed and recommended approval of the new G1 zone to the County Commission, and so that's where we're at. I can kind of answer any specific questions on that, or and then kind of wait and get into the next item.
A couple questions for you. Every time we look at zoning, we also are looking at zoning for the entire county. It's
Right.
not specific for usually one area. How would this new grazing zone affect other areas in the county? For instance, if it was applied up in the mountains to the east of us here, how would that? What's the ripple effect of that if that was applied?
So obviously, this first item is just amending the ordinance and the general plan. I should mention on the back up,
Right.
then I'll get to that. We're also just making a slight addition to our general plan to include a new G1 zone as part of our land use element, and it would be in the agricultural watershed element, similar to the mining and grazing in the RA5 zone. And so this first item is just creating a new zone. The application of this new zone in whatever form that the commission would decide on, then that would go through a process, public hearing process to apply it to specific lands, which is one of our next items. And so in your example, any areas in the county that an applicant or the commission or would like to see this applied to, they go through that process, and then it would be voted upon and looked at specifically for that area. Any existing uses of the underlying zone would, if the zoning was changed, would be deemed non-conforming and would be able to continue according to our ordinance provisions for the continuation of non-conforming uses. So in your example, if there was some property in the watershed areas, in the mountainous areas, while those are CE1 or mining and grazing, those underlying properties would be able to continue whatever permitted uses that they would currently have. Any new uses in those areas would be held to the parameters of the new G1 zone as applied at that time.
So specifically for if we were ever fortunate enough to be able to do more logging up in the mountains, and this zone was applied to that area, would we have conflict?
Didn't specifically.
Going back and like, you know, if the federal government, if we were able to actually thin the forest out appropriately and manage it, you know, appropriately as I see fit,
Right.
with management of forest lands, and this was, you know, and for whatever reason, this was an overlay on there saying this is a grazing area, would that be in conflict with this?
So the grazing zone doesn't specifically address logging. I think the CE1 zone does. And so if an existing CE1 zoning that allowed and had an approved operation of a logging or a timber industry use, that would be able to continue as a non-conforming use. There are certain exemptions from our land use ordinance as it relates to federal lands, federal operations on federal lands. And so uses on federal lands or state lands are subject to our ordinance unless specifically exempted by a state or federal law. And so that would be independent of whatever zoning designation is placed on the land.
Okay. And I've read, I know these are all mixed together, but I've read that SITLA and BLM are not in favor of this.
Yeah, that's kind of getting to our next one. Specifically, there are some underlying property owners that have requested to not be included, and I can kind of get to those specifics. The one thing I would mention as it relates to the G1 zone, your agenda request and the recommendation that was forwarded to you from the Planning Commission has been presented in a specific context. I know there has been discussion with the County Attorney's Office about an alternative, but the Planning Commission and what's in your agenda request is what the Planning Commission recommended. Which would eliminate.
You know, we went through an RMP process, you know, our resource management plan, and I mean, just because BLM's opposed to what we do, it doesn't necessarily hurt my feelings at all, but I'm just stating that they generally try to follow zoning ordinances that we have, you know, in place.
Sure, yeah.
And so what kind of conflict would that cause?
Yeah, and I guess that would, you know, obviously our resource management plan invites the county to the land use table to collaborate on land use decisions. And I guess the hope would be that whatever designation and potential land use plans the county has for certain areas would be considered as part of the BLM's land use process.
Maybe if they don't if they don't like the zoning that we have on there, maybe they consider disposing of the land and getting it back to the state or county.
Yes, yeah. I mean, again, generally federal uses on federal lands are somewhat exempt, so.
And for clarification on that, Bryce, their objection is more to the area it's being applied, not necessarily to the creation of the zone.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want me to get into the actual rezone
And
request.
obviously, that's the next
But
agenda
yeah,
item.
yeah,
but
they're specific.
Just for that was just a
Yes,
clarification
yeah.
there.
Yeah, their letter was related to the specific application of the new zone. I didn't see it as necessarily creation of the new zone.
Right.
Perfect. I don't have any additional questions on that particular thing. Just a couple brief statements maybe from us, and then we'll open this for the opportunity for public comment. I know as I've worked through and looked at this, I believe one of the greatest challenges that we have is to find land use ordinances that give us the opportunity to preserve and to protect critical resources. Utah County has a unique position in the state of Utah, and the fact that we lead the state in agricultural receipt production. We are at the top in the nation in our tart cherry production, in our apricot production, and we also are an exporter of protein, which largely comes from our capacity to graze and raise and produce beef in this county. And so when I look at our land uses and the things that we have as they come under increasing pressure from urbanization, I think it's critical that we look to the future and ask ourselves is creating land use ordinances and zones that give us an opportunity to preserve that agricultural heritage, to preserve a capacity to produce food, not only for our own residents and citizens within this county, but obviously the role we play nationally as a producer. Is that something that is important? For me, it is. It was something I campaigned on, and that's why in this particular instance, I think the creation of an additional zone that gives us that capacity to apply it to land use areas within the county that makes sense. It makes sense for me to do that.
Yes, and grazing, I think grazing is one of the most underutilized areas, things that we can use in the way of our land and the preservation of our land. I think that so I have always been for grazing even on federal lands. It helps keep our fires down. Grazing is an avenue that if we use it appropriately, it can do wonders for our land appropriately. If you've seen Deseret Livestock up north, they have done appropriate grazing and grazing patterns, which has been phenomenal for the land, for the wildlife, and so I don't have any problem with a specific grazing zone necessarily, applied appropriately so that we're not having ripple effects with pushing out areas or pushing things off inappropriately just because of a zone. The mining and grazing zone with them two together I know they kind of went together just because it was easy to have a mining and grazing zone. That always kind of was the default. I don't see any problem with having them separated and having a separate grazing zone at all.
At this point in time, we would open up for public comment. I would remind you, I'm guessing based on our attendance today, there's hopefully several members of the public that would like to comment. We are specifically at this point in time considering the creation of this zone. So I would ask that your comments be in relationship to whether or not you would support us or disapprove of us creating a grazing zone to be applied in the county. Anticipating a large number of people wishing to comment, I would respectfully ask that you keep your comments to around 2 minutes. I'm not going to hold you to a timer by any standard, but we just want to make sure we're mindful of anyone that would like to have that opportunity to comment. But by all means, I hope you recognize that I know we as a commission definitely want to hear from you. It's our responsibility and role to be here to represent you. So it's only by hearing from you that we can make those type of informed decisions. So with that particular thought in mind, I would open it up for public comment in relationship to regular agenda item number 2 regarding the creation of a grazing zone in the county. And just for point of reference, please state your name when you come to the podium for the record.
Hi, my name is Robert Stevens. I live in Provo. Most of the time throughout history, whenever we pass such ordinances, what we're really doing in essence is we're taking something which is normally illegal and making it legal so we can do other things. Now, I know that in the next agenda item, after the ordinance is passed, then the purpose is to create monopolies, because we already have some installations that are there to excavate the earth and mine, and we want to go and limit those, and so no new ones are able to form, which means in essence that this day we're going to use the power of the government to go and create monopolies. In a free society, there are no monopolies, and it's the duty of the government to be a judge and step in and not create monopolies. Now, I have 60 acres right on 70 acres or so, right on 7300 South. I have lots of grass there. Some years I can get some people to go out and graze on it, and some years I can't. It depends if there's water there, if it's fenced, if you want to spend the time and fence the area. But the largest issue is monopolies. I know Robert Nelson on Salem, up in Salem, he creates lots, and then he takes off the hills and he sells it as fill dirt. Not all the dirt on West mountain is equal. Some of the dirt is good for a fill dirt, some is good for base. There is a little bit of top soil there, and the mountain is so large it really has not been geologically excavated. This applies to all the mountains in Utah. There are treasures there that we have not yet explored, that we don't know about. And to limit it and to establish a zoning, you're in essence creating monopolies. You are giving yourselves and future leaders of the county the chance to pick winners and losers and the opportunity to go give out a bunch of favors. So I strongly oppose this, and I hope you see it my way. Thank you.
Shauna Phelps. I'm for this. I don't remember your name.
Again, please address
But as far
us
as
and
monopolies
commentary.
goes, that's probably one of the most ridiculous excuses I've ever heard for not incorporating this. It will not keep other mines from continuing to go other places. The only thing that this grazing affects is West Mountain area. And as far as monopolies goes, right now there seems to be a monopoly in favor of the gravel pits, which have intrusive effect on the well-being of the residents of West Mountain, as well as all of the farms that are out there, and that because of the dust and the debris have to deal with pests. So I am for this, and there's nothing that's going to keep these mining operations from opening up mines in other areas where it's more conducive, where there's not a large population.
Good morning, Julie Blaney, and we have a large farm on West Mountain. And what I love about West Mountain is that people for many, many years now have been going there for the beauty and quiet and peacefulness of West Mountain. And a long time ago when we bought our land there was almost no mining activity, but everything has changed as the big money of the mining industry has pushed to expand and expand and expand. And for so many people that have put their entire wealth, their livelihood, and everything into owning their beautiful properties out on West Mountain, it's making it almost unbearable. I do support this zoning change. I'd like to see West Mountain preserved. I'd like to see the artifacts that have been discovered in that area preserved. Grazing harms nothing. The trucks and the pollution and the dust of the mining hurts everything. We know that trees are dying, crops are failing. Even the offspring of our calves and sheep are being affected by the terrible pollutants of the mining. So I do support this grazing change. I applaud you for your support of this. I hope that you do know that there's great support in the community for this. We'd like to see our values preserved, and I think that this grazing change will preserve our values. Thank you very much.
My name's Rich Bowman, and I appreciate your comments with regarding out in the West Mountain area, trying to preserve it. I got a small farm out there, and I'd like to see it rezoned to grazing. I mean, that ditto what the sister just said right there. So I'm for changing rezoning for grazing.
My name is Clark Karras. I live at 7223 South, 3200 West in Benjamin. Our family has private property of about 80 acres on the West Mountain, and we do hold one of the 2 to 3 grazing permits on the West Mountain and have done so for almost 100 years now. I think that the time is well past. We appreciate the fact that this commission has been working with our communities for at least 4 years on this situation. I think today we all need to just stick to the point because the other things have been expressed having to do with our concerns about our livelihoods and different things like that. This is a small victory for us. I think that we should accept it, and we should accept it gracefully. We have lived as good neighbors with the mining companies that have been there, and I'll stay away from the other subject that everyone here is aware of, but the Karras family is very much in favor of this zoning change. And we would like to thank Commissioner Lee for listening to us when we first called. And we would also like to thank Nathan Ivy for his protection and his dedication. And I'm sure Commissioner Lee has it as well. But I know Commissioner Ivy feeds horses every morning and every night, but for agriculture. And this will help somewhat keep our way of life. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Martin Van Hemert. I live on West Mountain as well, and I'm also speaking in favor of the zoning change. We'd like to preserve the nature of the community, and the nature is agricultural, and that's probably why most of us moved there to begin with. Just to briefly address, with respect, the issue of monopolies. Using that line of reasoning that was presented, one would argue that there should be no zoning requirements anywhere, because basically I'd like to dispute that point, that it's an unfair monopoly. There's concerns also about not only the nature of the community, also the potentially the amount of water that could be used, groundwater or other waters that would be used by a mining operation or other any sort of operation that they can have large water requirements, dust issues, and we just don't want it looking like the point of the mountain. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Leah Patton. I'm about 2 houses away from the gravel pit. I have 35 acres out there in West Mountain, and I am pro-grazing. Thank you so very much for taking all your time and these years to work on this. But I hope to see eagles back out there. One day I went out and there's a huge rock and 4 or 5 eagles were sitting there sunning themselves. Since the gravel pit came, I have not seen any eagles out there. So, thank you.
I'm Julie Sainsbury, and I'm also a resident of West Mountain. I serve on the board of South Utah County Community Voice, and in regards to this zoning change, definitely for creating this new zone. I worded it incorrectly, but definitely for creating this new zone. When we were specifically looking at West Mountain and the needs that it had, and was looking through all the zones that the county offered, reading everything in them, I recognized, at least for myself, that there was a deficiency in what was being offered. So these zones have been established for years, and they have served wonderful purposes. But the reason why we have a working government is because situations change, growth happens, circumstances are different, and so we need to have a working government to adjust to what happens. And so in regards to West Mountain, there was not a zone that would best serve the area, which, I know you're looking at this new zone countywide. And so there could perhaps be other places that might also need this zone, but that will be decided on an individual basis. But at least for where we're at in the county, there was a lack of a zone that best fit the needs. And so creating this zone allows us the opportunity to go through the process to consider a zone that might better serve the area. So yes, we are for this creating of the grazing zone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Millicent Larson Fogarty, representing the Jack Larson family. We own private property on the West Mountain, also BLM permits, and we are definitely for the change to the grazing. I live in South Jordan, which is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. I have every intentions of moving back to the West Mountain as soon as I retire. South Jordan is a very lucrative city. We do have one downfall. Our water is, it's liquid gold. When I moved from Taylorsville to South Jordan, I couldn't believe the price of the water. The reason for that is South Jordan water was contaminated by the Kennecott mine. And I know Kennecott and Rio Tinto have been spending millions and millions of dollars to clean that up. But to this day, South Jordan's water is still contaminated from Kennecott. And we're not that close to Kennecott. We are quite a ways from the mine. So on that, just a water side note, but I'm definitely for the pro-grazing. Thank you.
We'd like to have everyone have the opportunity first to speak.
My name is Colette Russell, and I live on 7300 South, and I am definitely, wholeheartedly, 100% in favor of the grazing. I would like to see our mountain preserved, the heritage that was there, that is there still, that hasn't been destroyed. It's a farming community. We need to look after who's going to provide the food for the state, who is going to, and the water issues. There is growth, but to a certain point, we need to put a cap on things because there's not enough resources in our state to take care of what's happening. And I am 100% in favor. Thank you, commissioners.
My name is Marcine Brown. I would just like to go on record that I am for this grazing, this new zoning. I would also, I don't know how long these records go. I hope it's forever because my children and grandchildren are going to be out on West Mountain for a long, long time. And I just want it to go on record that we all fought for this and that if things go south, as they probably will, especially with health hazards going on, I just want my children and grandchildren to know that we did fight for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. My name is Tanya McDonald. I also live on 5600 West, and we are beekeepers. We have kept bees for the last almost 10 years. And I can tell you in the last 5 years, we have had so many bees colonies die. Almost every year we lose half of our bees, and we are having lots of issues with dust mites and just trying to keep our bees alive. They need a clean place to be able to pollinate, and if the trees are dusty and the blossoms are not clean, the bees can't get in there. And you know, over the entire population of the United States, bees, the honeybee population is decreasing dramatically. Every year we receive from the USDA a survey of hives and how our hives are doing and what we can do to better improve our hive quality. And it's a real threat to agriculture and to all the food that we eat. There's a very large percentage of all the food that we eat in the United States and throughout the world that is directly affected by bees. So I would just like to say I am definitely for this grazing ordinance and want to protect our our bee colony. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Acerson with the Utah Rock Art and Research Association. Organization is very much into the preservation and protection of rock art wherever it exists in the state of Utah, and we became aware of rock art on West Mountain by public people calling us and asking us if we knew of the existence of this rock art that was on West Mountain. We got started out there, and south of the existing mine and north of the existing mine, we have now located over 70 boulders that have rock art that's probably dated from, I don't know, thousands of years ago to maybe the Ute culture. And it is the artistic values of this is very unique and very, very descriptive. The images are really well done. And there's sites close to the mining operation currently, and the expansion zone is also there. And we think that the grazing zoning change would have a better chance of protecting that. I know there's laws and regulations that mandate organizations to protect it if they find it, and the survey that was done prior to the mining permit that's going on now did not even identify the rock art there. Some rock art boulders have been moved from some location, probably the existing mine, to a new kind of protected area. But there is, we're still walking the area, still finding more boulders on a daily basis, and so there's quite a cultural, historic value to the West Mountain area. It has a lot of very, very unique and cultural heritage there that needs to be preserved and protected, and the grazing zoning permit would probably have a better chance of that process happening, but allow that rock art to remain in place instead of being moved or relocated, and that changes the story and the archaeological significance of that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional individuals who wish to speak for or against this for an initial point? Seeing none, Robert, will you be welcome to come back?
I had a phone call this morning with a Brian Sorensen, who's an excavator. He doesn't really want to get involved with this because he's both for it and against it. But here are some of the things that he said. He said that at the end of 7300 South is the Kilgore operation, and that's an earth extraction operation. Now, he doesn't buy all of the stuff from that operation. He says there are about 8 or 9 excavation locations around the mountain, and he buys some from one location and he buys others from another location. It just depends if you're doing road fill or base or gravel or soil or so forth. You know, what this is always about, as it always is, it's about free agency. For those of us who attend Sunday school and have been taught this over and over and over again, if a man or a woman, if they own property somewhere in the mountains, is it our duty to go and tell them, you cannot go and build on your property. You cannot use your property for mining. You can't use it any other reason than for grazing. And if they say no, or if you're the owner of the land and you say, no way, it's my land, and I have a God-endowed right, an inalienable right to go do whatever I want on my land, as long as it doesn't harm my neighbor. And the person who wants it to be a grazing zone says, well, okay then, I'll go take it up to the government, and I'll use the force of government to go force you to make it into grazing so you can't go build on your land and so forth. Now, this isn't just going to hurt all the people. It's also going to hurt the government too. I realize that in the growth of the population that like these mines are essential. I have land right there, and trucks go back and forth all day long, you know, during the hours that they operate. But it's a big mountain and there are mountain delivery here, and we'll find new places where the soil is better, or the gravel is better, or the fill is better, and so forth. If the free market establishes that certain land is for grazing, then I'm all for grazing. I'm all for farming. I like to see a lot more of the issue before us is free agency. And although we all want it to be a grazing area and lots of grazing areas, are we going to use the force of government to go and tell people that they don't have free agency and they can't use it for whatever purpose that they want to use it for? And that's really, I think, the issue at hand. Now, if it all passes, it means that we're not going to make it all into a grazing area. All the excavation areas will remain and do what they're doing and more of it. And we give them a permit to go do it for years and years to come and shut out all the competitors. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any additional public comment on this particular issue? Yes.
I'm Dan Wells. I live in West Mountain, and we moved out there 4 or 5 years ago. His comments that this doesn't affect us is a bunch of bull. You know, West Mountain right now, there are 7 gravel pits out there. I don't want to live in the middle of a gravel pit, and it just seems like this is just expanding further and further. And this does affect us all. You know, the roads really weren't built for the kind of traffic that we're seeing, and the dust and the noise is a problem, and I'm very much for this rezoning to limit the mining on West Mountain. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Lana Creer Harris. I'm speaking peripherally for the Creer Family Trust and for myself. I live in Leland, which is considerably east of West Mountain, and you would wonder why I've got a dog in this fight. Well, I breathe the air from the county, everywhere from the county. And grazing is a heck of a lot less dusty. Start there. And we need grazing land. I come from a cattle family, both sides of the family ran cattle. And we know what they need, and they know where they need it. And West Mountain, if it were grazing, is a lot more productive for us. The air is cleaner. The rock art certainly, yeah, it might get a little by-blow on it once in a while when the cow walks by, but it's going to wash off. And so it is vital to remember what we use that land for and what it should still be used for. And in the process of taking care of our agriculture, we could also take care of our air. There are air monitors now. My brother's got one in his backyard that he bought himself for fun that are showing incredible particulates. And he's a quarter mile east of me. So there's a lot going on that we need to look at and why West Mountain's so important. Historically, I'm a member of the Daughters of Utah Pioneers. There are historic sites out there. There are historic sites clear back to the rock art. So that's important, and I want you to balance all of that against the potential of what might come out of the ground in the process of shaving the face off that mountain when it can no longer be grazed, planted, or turned into an orchard. And the orchardists are getting a lot of fugitive dust on their product, and that's something that is something that needs to be addressed as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name's Eric Van Zwol. Let's put this up. There we go. So I am in favor of creating this grazing zone. I, regardless of or irrespective of where we actually use the grazing zone, it would be nice to have a decision on whether or not the zone is going to be created before I share my comments on where it's used. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tim Ewell, born and raised on West Mountain. I am for the grazing. I guess I have a question, I guess, in a way. You know, if we're mining something, can we graze on it? I don't think so. And I'm worried about my drinking water. I'm worried about the big trucks. I've seen them. They take up the whole road because they need to. Again, you know, like somebody else said, the roads aren't really built for this, and I'm seeing the damage that it's creating to the roads, the train tracks, the damage it causes my vehicles, and you know, even more so than that, I'm concerned about my family's safety in the big trucks. I had a personal friend that got ran over by one of these trucks. And I think there's a better place for it. I'd like the mines out of my backyard. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Logan Gurr. I'm for the grazing. My job is taking me to a few mines throughout Utah, Nevada, and I've worked on Kennecott, and honestly, they're one of the best mines. They have strict rules. They follow the MSHA rules strictly. They have their own on top of that. But once the land is dug into, it'll never be the same. I've worked on their projects where they're trying to reclaim the land, but I look at it and it's never the same. Like we've heard, the water's polluting, the things happen, and along with that, going onto these mines, I wear hard hats, steel toe boots, high vis, safety goggles, all the PPE that's required. But I have two little boys that play in my front yard on 7300. Trucks don't see them. And I moved out to Benjamin for the life of the farm, to be able to raise my kids around animals, to teach them those traits. I didn't move to a mine. I didn't move to go have all these huge trucks, which that's what comes with mines. They're moving the material, but I don't want to lose my kids. There's what I've seen with these mines, a lot of them, Kennecott started when there was no one around them. And all these other mines I've been to, they're in the middle of nowhere. And they're not affecting the lives of people as this one would, where there's a community and they're growing this mine up. They want to expand it to develop, so that's more traffic, more issues that are going to arise, which we've heard. So I am for turning this into a grazing zone. Thank you.
Julie Blaney again, and this time I'm speaking for a concerned neighbor. The Pullmans live on the corner of where the Benjamin Park is. I apologize, I don't know the exact street. But he called me one day and asked me to walk through his home. They're on that corner where all of the trucks come down the road. And they've done a beautiful restoration on their home. It's a gorgeous, it's a very old home, but it's gorgeous inside. But the home is being shaken to pieces. They showed me cracks and where plaster and everything is just falling apart in their home. It cannot withstand the weight of those heavy trucks as they come around that corner. They say that it's almost impossible for them to go in their yard anymore. The noise continues all day and into the night. And so that's another consideration, is that the traffic of the mining industry does impact those that have lived there forever. Some of these homes have been there longer than any mining has been there. Now, that this family would have been here today, they asked me to explain they work and the meetings are not very easy to attend for people who have jobs to attend, but I ask you to take that into consideration as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Chris Grewell. I live in West Mountain. And I would like to say I'm in favor of the grazing initiative. I think there's so many reasons to move that direction. Water quality, air quality, noise pollution, the visual shed is going to be destroyed, wildlife habitat fragmentation, inadequate transportation infrastructure to handle the size of the vehicles, safety hazard on those roads. To me, it just doesn't make sense to expand mining. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional comment. That'd be a safe assessment, it looks like. All right, I'll bring it back up here for any additional discussion.
Yeah, if Bryce and Robert. As I'm looking down through this, and I see how you crossed out, or it has been crossed out, the mining part of this, because we're looking at the zoning, the mining, there, is the mining and grazing zone still intact on itself, by itself? So we have a mining and grazing zone, and we're looking at a grazing zone only. That's my understanding. I just want to make sure that's
we have
correct.
a current chapter in the mining, that's still mining and grazing.
Down on permitted uses, it says the following, the copy that I have, the crossed out copy says the following shall be permitted in the M&G mining and grazing -1 zone. Is that M supposed to be crossed out? Just curious.
Yes.
Okay. And then it has crossed out the 1, 2, and 3 are crossed out, left oil and gas and water wells in there. Other things. Why was fish hatcheries and raising of game fish and fish for human consumption, why was that taken out?
As part of this process, the staff and planning commission took a look at other uses in the mining and grazing zone that we felt didn't necessarily weren't necessarily consistent with the stated legislative intent of the new zone. And so we took a look at fish hatcheries, correctional institutions, a couple other uses if you go into conditional uses. Those were just suggestions. Planning Commission discussed those a little bit and felt comfortable with those inclusions. And so that was just to be kind of consistent. Number one, be consistent with the legislative intent. And number two, we also took a look at, we want to make sure we didn't, with the subsequent rezone requests for certain property, we wanted to make sure we weren't on those other uses, addressing uses that were in existence in the West Mountain area.
Okay, on the fish hatcheries and raising of game fish, that one concerns me just a little bit. I just don't know if that's, and then getting down to the permitted conditional uses that are in there. That's where you took out the correctional institutions adjustments. Took out the sanitary landfill, helicopter pads, building or facilities for manufacturing and storing of explosives. So is this again just being consistent with what you've seen in there?
Sure. Yep. Yeah, and those will all still be available in the mining and grazing zone. Some of the uses, for example, the nursing home, those are uses that, if you look at the intent of this zone and really where those areas probably need to be, those services need to be provided, didn't really match with maybe the intent of this zone, a little more remote.
So I noticed in the permitted conditional uses, you have man-made lakes, ponds, dams, and others, that are in there.
Yeah, I mean,
I
again,
mean,
these are just kind of
going back to the
suggestions.
fisheries and hatcheries,
Yeah.
that's, anyway.
Sure. And again, Planning Commission didn't really have strong feelings. I think the fish hatcheries one was brought up. There were some questions on that too. So, but they decided to go ahead and include that.
And then usually in zones, conditional uses go through a different process. It's not just an automatic, it can go through. Robert, can you talk a little bit about conditional uses? And what that means,
Conditional
and how that works?
uses, the law's kind of changed over the last 20 years or so. We had cases that we've dealt with where conditional use requests were denied, and they were upheld in district court on a number of occasions. That was 20 years ago. And the law's kind of changed to where if you have a conditional use in your ordinance, you're actually granting the use, but you're allowing the entity to put additional conditions on it. And the only time that you would really be able to deny it, I'm kind of giving a real narrow view of it, is if you would not be able to attach any conditions at all that would mitigate the proposed noxious use, if you will. So that's a very limited basis to overturn or to reverse or to say, not reverse, but to deny, a conditional use. So typically, if it goes to the Board of Adjustment, they would look to approve the conditional uses and attach conditions attempting to mitigate the potential use going in. There are conditions already attached in our ordinance, but they would be able to address additional reasonable conditions that would be attached due to what was presented via information from the public or studies or other things that may have deal to the uniqueness of this use, uniqueness of the property and surrounding areas, etc. They may be able to attach additional conditions. So the question is, or the response to that, your question is, the conditional use is a permitted use, but with conditions, additional conditions. And the only time you really can deny that is if there's no conditions we can attach that would mitigate that use in that area. And that, again, that's very narrow. And the law has changed to essentially do it that way over the last 20 years or so, in my experience. Now, I will say that there was a request of my office to look at potential ways to I don't want to say compromise, but to consider the underlying property rights of all those who might be involved in this grazing zone area. And so my office, in coordination with Bryce, we did prepare an alternative language which would allow for mining uses in the grazing zone as a conditional use, which would go to the Board of Adjustment. What we also did, though, was take out asphalt and concrete batch plants, so in the grazing zone, which is in there now too. That's being taken out as well. But so that alternate language would essentially allow for mining back in as a conditional use as opposed to a permitted use, but it would not allow in any event batch plants. So that was an alternative proposal that we sent to you for your review. It's your guys' call. I mean, we're not advocating anything here. All we're saying is that we were approached about looking at the property rights of others, and that's what we did. And I should mention one other thing. I mentioned this at the Planning Commission. As Bryce mentioned earlier, that if you rezone certain properties, and we'll get into that in a minute, the underlying uses that were previously approved will continue on. And this last year, in 2017, the Property Ombudsman's Office issued a legal opinion in May of last year, related to Tooele County, related to mining operations in particular. And in that legal opinion, it was the Ombudsman's opinion that that mining uses can be expanded, even if the zone changes or other things. They can be expanded within the bounds of their property. So, for example, there are some properties up here which have started to mine legally by a permit on BLM property, and the BLM property boundary line is a mile square. And they've only been mining a little bit of that mile. So they could technically go and expand all the way through those boundaries, that full mile. What they can't do is go on to new, if you were to do a zone change, they would not be able to expand onto properties which have not been previously mined. That's what it would be, prohibited.
So what does that mean? I mean, you do a great job of explaining it in legal terms and so forth. But
Sure.
what does that mean? I know what that means, but I want you to state what that means for mining operations. Let's say for the next generation or two out there in that area.
Mining operations, the current mining operations out there will continue and can be expanded within their property boundaries. That's what it means. So nothing you do here today is going to change that. It's not going to change the haul routes. It's not going to change the dust collection. They can continue to mine until they're done. It's approved. It's a grandfathered use. No matter what you do here today, no matter if you approve this rezone, no matter if you approve the new zone, the grazing zone, no matter what you do, they're going to be able to continue on unless you buy them out. And I'm assuming that would be a pretty high number. And there's been no consideration of that. But
So-
they get to continue on. And they get to expand in their property. Yes.
So
That's how our office would look at it.
Also with that, and I've heard this, I haven't actually spoken with anybody about this, but I've heard that there's groups that have purchased land for future mining, let's just say mining. If this condition here, this permitted, I mean, if this grazing zone is overlaid in place, then would there, the term is always a taking. Is there potential of a taking from an individual who has purchased property for a use and now it's being changed?
Well, you'd always have a potential someone claiming a taking. Whether the taking actually occurs would be up to what the court says. But they would have use of the property, just maybe not the use that they intended it to be for. And so I think that if they have application in prior to this zone being started, which has been 6 months ago, their applications might predate this and might be able to proceed on the old zone. But if their application was not in, then they're subject to this current, whatever you're doing here today. Yeah.
And then going back to zoning, typical with what we do for zoning, a lot of times we'll have what the zone is intended for, and then we'll have conditional uses. I mean, we tend to put a lot in there. I mean, I see, automobile, motorcycle, racetracks, and we put a lot into these for multiple use. And so, some of my concern with rodeo grounds and electric generators and man-made lakes in conditional uses, and then others that are with parks and facilities. So where is the line drawn when we're talking about zoning? It's a trick question in many ways, and I know you're smiling because it is. But what's the process in planning on a legal basis in which you say in, out?
Well, you have to remember a zone creation and a zone change are both legislative decisions. And so honestly, it falls back to you folks.
Right.
And what you want in and what out. Now, there are a lot of things in this, and they could do a lot, and it kind of goes back to your question about is it a taking? Well, there's a lot of opportunities to do things in this zone. Maybe not mining, right, as it currently sits, and is proposed by the Planning Commission. But there are a lot of things you can do in that zone. And by some folks, may be more noxious than mining, as you look at those things. I think the intent was you have a legislative document, which is a general plan, and you're trying to enact your zoning to coordinate with that general plan. And that's really what it boils down to. And we do, that's why we have a planning commission who helps, we have a staff who helps try to figure out what works with the general plan, what kind of uses can kind of work together in an area, and it's all legislative. that point. Then it's up to you to make the final call. You have more you want to add, Bryce?
Quick planning context. So at some point, again, this proposed G1 zone was based off the existing mining and grazing zone. We didn't specifically add any new uses. We looked at eliminating specific uses. The existing mining and grazing zone is a result of a legislative body, a county commission, taking a look at it over different periods of time. At some point, they created the mining and grazing zone, late 70s, and assigned uses that they felt were appropriate. Over time, the public's come and asked for certain uses, and it went through the process, a public hearing and legislative process to take a look at those uses and determine if they were consistent with the adopted policies at the time, and then implemented or not by the legislative body. And so you'll sometimes see some of these uses that we may or may not have an existing use utilizing that, but at some point it was determined whether a potential applicant who was able to convince the legislative body that this is a good use for this zone, I'm going to do it, and it didn't ever come around.
So that brings up another question, and that is that no matter what happens here, a legislative body in the future could reverse any of it.
Let me give you a prime example of that. Up until maybe 2008, our batch plants were only allowed in the industrial area. And the planning commission recommended the commission, so they started putting batch plants inside mines. I may be wrong on the years, but that was a change that was done. And a future commission can come and change it back, and another one might come and change it again, and that's part of the legislative process. And that's what this is. This is legislative issued before you today. This is not a current application on a subdivision where you're looking at administrative. This is a legislative decision today.
Yeah. And it's a balancing act. We've got growth coming here on, I've seen the numbers, we've all seen the numbers, millions headed this direction, apparently. and it's concerned because we're gonna have conflicts like this all over in the county in different areas. We see it up north, we see it in the south, we see, and we have been favorable to, I'll say agriculture. We've been pretty protective of agriculture and that process, and what's there, and striking that balance is it's tough. Where that balance
You
is.
get paid the big bucks,
My
right?
concern always is pendulum swings, because if it goes through a process in which it seems to be as reasonable as possible, then we don't get these wild swings back and forth with future legislative bodies. If we can correct it appropriately and still go in a direction that's it's not just these wild swings back and forth where somebody's in office and all of a sudden it changes, somebody else is in office, it changes again, and we just go back and forth and no one knows where we're at the time. That's a concern. That's the balance that I'm trying to find with this.
Well, it happens on a yearly basis with the state, obviously. Legislature starting this next soon, and so, yeah, I mean, we have changes all the time, and our staff and community development try our best to deal with those, as both in the state and also here locally. Any other questions you have for me? As I mentioned, we did propose, I shouldn't say propose, we did prepare a middle ground proposal, if you will, on this as well, to deal with some of the issues that were presented.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you for that. Mr. Chair, I would propose that we, with some of the information that I've seen here and some of the additional information, I would propose that we continue this for 1 week so that I can work down through, I personally would like to work down through some of the questions that I have, and making sure that I try to strike the best balance as possible.
Okay.
As we move forward. So I'd make that motion that we continue this for 1 week.
Okay, I will second that, so. And we have a motion on the table to continue this item for further discussion for 1 week. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That will carry 2-0. All right, we will now be looking at regular agenda item number 3. This particular agenda item is to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the official Utah County zone map from the mining and grazing zone to the grazing 1 zone for properties located in the listed sections. Oh, yep. If anyone is leaving, could you please make sure you sign the roll at the back, by the back door, please?
I think it's appropriate that I continue this.
Yes.
I'll make a motion that.
Given
yeah.
that we don't even have the zone, it would probably be appropriate to continue this.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we continue agenda item number 3 for 1 week as well.
I'll second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 2-0.
On number 4?
Those two have kind of been covered, so we'll have general public comment at the end, so you would be more than welcome to make a comment at that particular point in time. But in the interest of continuing with the business of the meeting, we'll continue through our regular agenda items. But if you do have a comment, we would love to hear from you during the general public comment at the end. Okay, we will move now to regular agenda item number 4. This is to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the Utah County Land Use Ordinance relative to the applicability of requirement of the Natural Hazardous Overlay Zone. To kick us off with this, I would ask staff to please come forward and make their presentation.
Okay, Brandon Larson, Community Development staff. Back in middle of last year, we presented somewhat of a proposal to you, a proposed ordinance. It was pretty simple in its nature. It was really just a new definition of known hazard area, and the idea was to define a known hazard area, and then say in section 512 that any known hazard area would be subject to section 512. After staff started looking at that idea, and when we presented that to you, we were explicit in letting you know that we planned on looking at it closer. And we did, and after we looked at it, we didn't think that was the best idea. We thought it was maybe a little more careful approach of if we're going to apply the NHO zone, we ought to look at land a little more carefully when we put that in. And so what we did is we stepped away from that idea, and if you'll recall, what the reason why this kind of came about was because of someone sniffing around in the Thistle area about development, and so what we've done is we've got this is kind of the first of 2 applications. You won't see the other one for a few months because the other application got continued at least till the March Planning Commission meeting. But what this is kind of a cleanup of section 512, and so what staff went through and did I guess in a way their work was really related to, I guess you could sum it up to a handful of things. And before I get into that, I'd say that the basic structure of the NHO zone isn't proposed change. Essentially what we have is maps that identify what areas in the NHO zone. And once we have that mapping in place, then we also have certain uses that if they fall in that mapped area, they have to have a hazards assessment, and then if the assessment requires mitigation measures, those measures have to be incorporated into the design of the structure or land use. So in no way does this NHO zone restrict anybody from developing their land. It just says, if you're going to develop in a hazard zone, we'd like you to be smart about it and incorporate some mitigation measures to make sure that it's safe. So general cleanup is probably the biggest thing with this. We went through, found some old information in there that kind of was a little outdated, and cleaned that up. One of the biggest things that we proposed with this was the addition of 2, they're called plates, but they're essentially maps. There's a big map series of the entire state of Utah, and there's 2 there's at least 2 or 3 that line up with the county, and so we're proposing to include plates 14 and 19 from Hardy and Hardy and Elliott's landslide maps of Utah. Those seem to identify some pretty key hazard areas in the state. So we're proposing that those be adopted as another mapping resource for identifying the hazard areas in the county. One of the other things is the state's made a bigger emphasis on applying the plain language of the ordinance and codes, and so one of the things that staff realizes is that large-scale developments aren't specifically and plainly required to have a natural hazards assessment. So this proposal would require large-scale developments to have an assessment. With that being said, there is a proposed exception to exclude large-scale developments under certain circumstances, particularly when if you have a large-scale development and a portion is in the NHO zone and a portion's out. If a developer wants to basically label the portion that's in the NHO zone unbuildable for occupied structures and critical facilities, they could be excluded from the NHO zone requirements. And then there was also another major component of this is the proposal to sometimes we'll of course have permit applications for the expansion of homes, or even sometimes we'll have plat amendments, and what this exception would, we have an exception in here that would allow the county engineer to determine that an expansion of a certain land use or structure could be exempted from the requirements of the natural hazards, or exempted from having to have a natural hazards assessment as part of their application, based on the finding that the scale or scope of the structure use isn't going to expand or get larger. We did expand. We are proposing a few additional uses. Critical facilities is an important definition in relation to the natural hazards overlay zone. It's usually like occupied structures, structures that house that may where a number of people may occupy it. There may uses like such government vehicle shelters, things like that, communication centers. We're proposing an expansion of that slightly, just to add a couple of uses that we thought were helpful to add, things that we thought we'd want to protect. And so that's in a nutshell. That's that's a brief overview of the proposal, and so certainly here to answer any questions you have on it.
Yeah, thank you. This is an important one in many respects, because building in these areas is not just to protect those that are building for the first time, but it's those that actually purchase it later on, that think that everything's up to a certain standard, and so I appreciate that. Some of my concerns, and maybe you can help me with alleviate some of these. Some of my concerns come in broad strokes on maps,
okay,
where there is maybe a natural hazard in the area,
mm-hmm,
but the map gets this circle that is huge.
mm-hmm.
How are we going to rein that back in to a reasonable, a conservative type of, not just a, for instance, I've heard over and over with our CE1 zones that was just kind of painted with a broad stroke across the mountains, as we just said, oh, CE1, CE1, CE1. Now all of a sudden we're seeing the effects of these broad strokes without some common sense in there and looking at what that actually means. And so how do we do that with this?
Well, so again, this proposal would just adopt a couple of new maps, but that doesn't mean that there's still a process that has to be taken to actually include land in the natural hazards overlay zone. We have an application and process in the Thistle area, and the idea is, so you adopt you adopt these hazard areas, and then you use that to come in. Maybe staff or somebody else proposes an amendment, says, hey, this map shows this area in a hazards area. And so then we go through a process, someone makes an application, it goes to the planning commission, it goes to you. And so there's definitely a public process before any land is put into the natural hazards overlay zone. The person who has the property in Thistle, there's one major property owner in this Thistle area, and he asked planning commission to continue that matter so that he could present some information to the county to show that maybe there's a reason to kind of scale back the proposed NHO zone area based on some geological information he has. So there is
It was data driven.
Yeah, it's data driven, exactly.
Yeah. I'm looking at
way.
the map and I see, big blotches and places, and I just want to make sure it's data driven and not.
It is data driven.
And
There certainly is
here's
public
a
process.
kind of example for me where I have a similar concern. I know there's a particular property, and I know of it because we've kind of been exploring it on another board that we sit on, that has some contaminants in it. It's got oil, it's got, it's been used very inappropriately, so it has some significant environmental hazards on it. The property just to the east of it is prime productive farmland. And so I would be concerned that prime untarnished land just kind of gets lumped because it's in a proximity, and so we're creating a whole bunch of hassle for a land when even on the 10 acres that has contaminant, after further investigation, it appears that it's only a very small portion of that land that is even hazardous. And so that's where it kind of gets worrisome for me as to how do you narrow that down so that you're not becoming, that we're providing appropriate protection, especially for those who come after on property that have had these exposures to these problems, but we're not framing it so broadly that we're really creating a lot of bureaucratic paperwork for people to have to jump through when they haven't been harmed at all.
I think the other thing too is when a property gets rezoned to the NHO zone, it's not saying that certainly again that they can't develop the property. It's saying, hey, this is an area that you might want to look at a little more closely. And so then it may trigger a process where mitigation or a hazards assessment report is required. But that hazards assessment, in fact, I've got one that the most recent one I looked at said, hey, there's really no issues. And so essentially what's going to happen with that application is they'll put notes on the plat, on a subdivision plat that said, hey, there was an assessment done. And really, it's not going to be much more than that. So it's an area of general concern, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the developer is going to have to do much more than provide an assessment and show that there really wasn't a problem on the property. Beyond that, one other thing I'd point out is there is, and we've had this issue before, there is a process for someone to dispute their inclusion, the inclusion of their land into the NHO zone. So
you answered my next question. Well done.
This is Bryce Armstrong. I'm going to add just one little thing here. Once upon a time, Utah County, it might have even been housed in community development, had a full-time geologist that was a county employee. And that geologist was instrumental in creating our existing natural hazards overlay. And there were a number of maps and studies that were done that the geologist spearheaded to adopt our existing and delineate our existing NHO zone. It was really focused on the valley. The Wasatch Back was kind of left out. And so, again, we'd love to have the funding or the resources to have a full-time geologist or even maybe a consultant take a look at these with much more scrutiny. But I think this is the way that we can identify, relying on information that we feel is reliable to identify these areas, and then allow a site-specific study to be done to determine if any mitigation requirements are.
So if we accept this proposal today, it's accepting this map as well, right?
Correct.
So I'm going to focus in on one that almost looks like it's right over my house, which is kind of interesting, but it's not. It's just a little bit east of, looks like American Fork.
Okay.
What in the world could that be? I mean, I don't know what, you see which one I'm talking about?
I don't exactly, but I guess a point that I'd make in this, so I think when I forwarded this to you, I gave you the legend for the maps, and it's really the first two, it's the shallow landslides and then the landslides, deep-seated landslides are the ones, when we talked with the Utah Geological Survey, and they
This
said.
is down on flat ground here.
Is it?
Yeah, look, just come take a peek really quick.
This one here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is, that would be an area of deep-seated landslides. I don't know, that's really interesting. I believe that, this map series may be based on soil types. When I talked with the UGS, they identified a couple of soil types that are more prone to landslides than others, and perhaps that soil, on that polygon you just showed me is maybe one of those different soil types that is more prone to landslides. The UGS suggested that maybe as far as the legend on the map goes, to just as far as inclusion of land in the NHO zone, to use those first two legend, or the first two first two landslide types on the legend there. So.
Yeah. So for us accepting this map today, what does that mean?
It means that it can be used it can be used by the county zoning administrator in his this is the word used by the ordinance in determining what land lies in the NHO zone. And so, yeah, it would definitely be data that could be used by staff to administer the NHO zone.
Robert Moore, County Attorney's Office. So the NHO zone really is like an overlay zone over an existing zone that it is. But just one other point I wanted to make to you is we do have a geotech engineer on staff via contract. So, and we did submit this to that for their recommendation, and we did receive back a recommendation, and that was incorporated into this document. So.
The other thing too that I want to point out in relation to your last question, Commissioner, was again for this, going back to that polygon, which I don't think is in our jurisdiction, but if it was, we'd have to go through a process to include that land in the NHO zone. So just because this map's adopted, I mean, you can look at the Sundance area. That area hasn't. There's tons of landslide polygons there. We haven't put that land in the NHO zone, and until we go through a process to add that land, if a building permit or an application shows up in that area and it's not in the NHO zone, we're not going to be looking for hazards until this body, approves some type of proposal to add it into the NHO zone.
So this is I mean, I read down through it, landslides. This is not avalanches or anything like that. This is just landslides and geological disturbances, so forth.
This is specifically for landslides, and down the road we may propose some other mapping, but this was specific to landslides.
Okay, so this is just a base that you're starting from.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because that one doesn't make any sense to me.
It is strange. There's even the purple colors, one of the more fascinating ones on there. It's I'm certainly not the best to explain this, but it's related, I think, to liquefaction, and you can have like a landslide on flat ground under certain conditions. It's pretty fascinating. So,
is that just a shift, or how does that?
I don't understand that myself. I just know that west of like in the Springville area, there's some land that's prone to flat land, flat surface landslides. So,
yeah, which is and the reason why I zoomed in on there is because right out of American Fork Canyon, when you come out of American Fork Canyon, those houses up on the hill,
Mm-hmm.
they're built on gravel pits. I mean, they're, are gravel.
Sure.
Seems like if there was any disturbance, those would just come tumbling down, just from my perception, but
Sure.
they're not listed on here.
Mr. Bryce and staff, that's one thing I want to add is, I say we don't have a geologist, but I just want to commend Brandon for his efforts on this. This is we feel our best attempt to address some deficiencies in our existing application of our natural hazards overlay. Obviously, there were limitations as to the extent of the original scope that was looked at. We're pretty confident there are some areas, especially in the hillside areas of the county that are now being experiencing more development pressure that are susceptible to some hazards that we feel really should be contemplated as part of this process. And so this referral to some of this other data, allows us to at least rely on something to identify areas of concern that would then go through a process, including coming back before the legislative body to determine if they're in that natural hazards overlay. And then that kicks in the specific study that can be site-specific and will allow a landowner to identify and say, hey, my property or my use isn't going to be as subjected to.
So the ones that are living in this polygon right now, they're not gonna be held to that standard right now until we go through the
Nothing will
process.
change
This is just preliminary to start the base of.
Yeah, this is just to allow us to rely on another reference beyond what these maps have much more detail than what was used in the late 80s. And so, at least we're trying to utilize some of the improved technology that is mapped, and some of our wording, our natural hazards allows us to do that with even future updates to technology to be as accurate as possible, to identify areas that we want to bring back to rezone, and then once an application comes in, then it's subject to more specific scrutiny and detail.
And of course, some of these are in cities, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We won't,
That's
that
nothing
one
that we
outside our
can really-
jurisdiction.
Probably be
Yeah.
in the city.
Yeah, okay. All the questions I have.
Okay, perfect. I don't have any additional.
All right, I'll make a, let's see, we're on number 4. I'll make a motion that we adopt the ordinance as stated in number 4.
I'll second that. I have a motion and a second to adopt the ordinance to amend the Utah County Land Use Ordinance as stated in regular agenda item number 4. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carries 2-0. All right, we'll now move to regular agenda item number 5. This particular item is to approve and authorize the commission chair to sign an addendum to the agreement with Highline Corporation to allow access to the Highline system for the 2018 calendar year. Commissioner Lee, I know you had some questions about this one, so I'll let you start us off.
Yes, the only question I had on this one was, where's the money coming from? I don't see any account number on here.
Mr. Chairman, if you'll recall at the end of the year, there was a commitment from the IT department with some of their excess funds to fund this. But what we forgot to take into consideration is this is for a 2018 expense. And so it really needed to come from targeted 2018 funds. And so nothing had been set aside. I just might want to add that this is something that I think, as we've talked, is something that's very important we need to do. And I made that notation on there about the funding just so that we could have this conversation. I know that as we work together with the HR department and yourselves, and that we can identify somewhere. But my notation was just strictly from the standpoint of we do need to identify that because our previous identification of funds by accounting principles wasn't able to be utilized.
And I would prefer that we have it identified before we actually
do it.
pass it. So should we continue this for a week to
Would you
get
be able
the
to have that?
identification
I
of
can
it?
address it.
Oh, you can address it? Okay.
Amy Taylor, HR Director. I will be eliminating a time-limited position, and then I will be finding the remaining 20% in my budget.
So you've got
Will
the
be coming
account?
from me.
You have the account?
Okay.
Okay.
This is one we probably can't continue because they have a deadline on us in order for this to happen this year. In order for us to continue on, they have to have the money by January 19th, I believe. Is that right?
Okay.
So that's one where you really need to decide this today and give us direction so we can get a PO going and get it done.
Sounds like we found the money.
Well, and this was my plan B. If IT wasn't able to fund it, then
Okay.
I was gonna eliminate this position.
Perfect, thank you. Okay.
So I'll move that we approve and authorize the commission chair to sign the addendum with the stipulation that the money has been identified to come out of HR's budget.
I'll second that. We have a motion to approve and authorize the commission chair to sign the addendum as stated in regular agenda item number 5 with the stipulation that the funding mechanism is to come from the HR department's budget. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 2-0. All right, and then next up, we have got regular agenda item number 8. This is to approve the Butterfly Biosphere Agreement between Utah County and Thanksgiving Point Institute Incorporated. My understanding is this was an originally approved item, and there was some technical changes that occurred, and it is now back before us. Is that Dave? Would you address that?
Yes, there was a change of location, and that change has been made to the documents.
Okay. And my thing just decided to log me out. Sorry about that. I don't know why it does that sometimes.
Yes.
Okay. In relationship to this particular item, is there any additional questions or discussion? I know for me on this particular one, I felt like the county made a commitment to Thanksgiving Point and that feeling that the county's interests have been protected through the documenting process. I would be willing to stand by the previous commitment of the commission. That was kind of my thoughts on this one.
Mr. Chairman, just remind me what your plans were as far as the funding of this.
This is a TRCC fund.
Okay, we weren't looking at bonding or anything.
No, this
Okay.
isn't a bond.
All
This
right,
is a
thank you for
TRCC.
clarifying that.
Yep, this is a TRCC funded project. It was just, I was gonna say it was discussed last year, but I guess it would have technically been in 2016. So,
I'll hold my comments, but I need to be as consistent as possible. I was not in favor of this, nor did I vote for it. And our TAB board, the majority of them felt the same way. I would probably propose that we continue this for a week.
okay, that's fair enough. Is that
Yeah, that's a motion.
motion? I have a motion to continue regular agenda item number 8 for 1 week. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that will carry for a continuation of 1 week. All right, to my knowledge, we need all 4 of our next agenda items.
Yes. Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property, water rights, or water shares at today's date at this location following the completion of our regular agenda.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 2-0.
I'll make a motion that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss the sale of real property, water rights, or water shares previously publicly noticed for sale at today's date at this location following the completion of our regular agenda.
Second, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 2-0.
I'll make a motion that we set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual or individuals at today's date at this location following the completion of our regular agenda.
Second, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 2-0.
I'll make a motion that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss the pending or reasonable imminent litigation for today's date at this location following the completion of our regular agenda.
I'll second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 2-0. We do not have any work sessions submitted at this time. We would open for general public comment, if there is any.
Julie Sainsbury from West Mountain, Utah. Commissioner Ivey and Commissioner Lee, thank you for allowing me to come up. I apologize for interrupting. I'm still learning this legislative process. And there was another consideration that was brought up when, after the public input had been closed. And so I didn't know, I guess I was thinking I needed to talk then, why we were still on the issue, but not realizing you had closed it completely off. So I do apologize. The consideration that was brought up was this alternative language that you could put into the grazing zone where the mining could be possibly put in there as a conditional use. I'm against that. And the reason being, for a few reasons. When, as South Utah County Community Voice, when we were considering the different zones to try to have, West Mountain consider to be changed to, we looked at the CE1 zone, and quite frankly, I thought it fit the need better than the CE2, than what we originally did. But the CE1 had mining in there as a conditional use. And I actually had just listened to a county commission meeting in regards to a pit where there were several residents that were there, and the pit was wanting to expand, and they were giving their input, and the commission still decided to let it expand. And so as I looked at that, I'm like, okay, so if it's in here under a conditional use and the mine meets the conditions, they will expand. They will still be there. Out on West Mountain, we're kind of unique. We have 7 mines out there, and we really only have a certain infrastructure of roadways to handle them. Putting a mine under conditional use doesn't help the situation. That area is unique. We need something unique. We need a grazing zone. Commissioner Lee, you talked about sometimes we use this broad stroke. I feel like putting that mine in there as a conditional use is using that broad stroke. That mining option is under there, under other options. And so here you're doing a broad stroke and putting it in this new grazing zone. It's no longer unique. You can have a mine in a CE1 zone. You can have a mine and a mining and grazing zone. So if you're going to put it in as a conditional use, why even create the zone? Why not just keep your mining and grazing zone? So it's not fulfilling, any unique need that might be occurring with the growth and the development and the safety and the needs of the residents of Utah County. And so I just wanted to give that comment, that input as a consideration. Inserting an alternate language that would allow that as a conditional use defeats the purpose of why you're creating a grazing zone. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments. Any additional public comment?
I wish I had an opportunity in one of the last agenda items. I want to mention that all the county is in a hazardous zone. If we have an earthquake of 7.5 or higher, if you live in the valley, then there's a good chance that the soil has high liquefaction. If this is your house, it's in the palm of your hand, you don't know how it's going to shake, right? If you're way up on the mountains, for instance in Provo on Mile High, you're in danger of rocks, which are going to fall on your house. And I lived up there, and there's already some walls in the backyard where rock has hit and bent the walls over. If you apply for a permit for a lot in Sherwood Hills right now in Provo, you'll be denied immediately, even if the lot was originally approved for subdivision, because they've realized that most of the land among the Wasatch Mountain is built on the shale that is slippery, and the depth of it varies depending on the location. But if the spring is really wet and then there's an earthquake, no one's able to go predict how far of a movement you'll have, and so you'll have landslides. We've already seen landslides up there. But I just want to point out that you just established some precedents for the future for a homeowner or a landowner, I mean, who would walk in and say, I'd like to go develop this, and they would immediately say denied because it's in a hazardous zone. And they may say, well, I'm innovative and I could build a steel home and it doesn't matter how it's going to shake. And they'll say, sorry, you know, it's in a hazardous zone. So that's some of the repercussions of what just happened. I know it starts off friendly, and I'm all for information and data. In fact, as I studied it in Sherwood Hills, it's actually lot specific. And geologists, if they do evaluations on lots, chances are they're going to find that there are fault lines under it, or there's this slippery shale underneath. Secondly, I want to go change the subject. I read through your documents, and I want to go and point out that there was an application for 3 lots on 1/2 acres to have wastewater systems. Now, if that's approved, then let's establish once and for all that the county health department thinks it's okay to have wastewater treatment systems on 1/2 acre lots. So why do we have a zoning of 5 1/4 acre lots? Wouldn't it make more sense to have some clusters of 1/2 acre lots if you can build an appropriate wastewater treatment system for the soil, and then put money into some kind of fund where you would use for the expansion of utilities into that area if the goal is urban expansion. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Remember, rebar's your friend.
Absolutely. All right, I appreciate.
Commissioner, with regard to setting of the litigation meeting, I would suggest that you also set a litigation meeting for the 11th at 11 a.m. up in the Commission Conference Chambers.
Yes.
Commission Conference Room.
I forgot about that.
I'll make a motion that we also set a meeting to discuss some pending reasonable imminent litigation on the 11th, and I can't remember the time. 11 a.m. up in our conference room.
I'll second that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 2-0. Thank you for the reminder, Dave. All right, we appreciate everyone and their time today and participation. We'll now move into our closed meetings.